My name's Adam. Even though I'm only 35, I feel like I've lived through a lifetime of experiences. During college, while most of my friends were busy with part-time jobs, I was always diving headfirst into internships. I guess my priorities were different from those of my peers. Because of this, right after graduating, I landed a job at a top-tier company that most folks from my college could only dream of joining. Everyone was shocked. But I never intended to stay there for long. It's not that I didn't appreciate the opportunity, I just felt stifled being in the same environment for too long. After spending 5 years at that company, I shifted gears entirely, stepping into a sales position, a field far removed from the IT world I was used to. This change wasn't just on a whim. I've always believed in expanding my horizons, in understanding different walks of life. Starting a sales role in my late 20s with zero experience certainly raised a few eyebrows. My boss wasn't too thrilled at first, but I was fortunate. I found myself in an environment where I was mentored patiently, and I got to learn the ropes of sales hands-on. After about 4 years in sales, I took a left turn and worked in road construction for the next 2 years. I wanted to see life from the other side, not as someone managing processes, but as someone in the thick of it, directed by others. Once again, I found myself surrounded by good people, in a lively workplace where I learned so much. Over a span of less than a decade, I'd changed jobs multiple times. While this might be common in places like the US, in the traditional Japanese business culture, it often raised eyebrows. But I never saw frequent job changes as a negative. Each shift added to my reservoir of skills and understanding. Now, at 35, I work at a factory that has been in my family since my grandfather's time. My dad currently runs the place, and he's always hoped I'd take over someday. I remember thinking during my college days, sure, I could manage the daily operations at the factory once I understand them, but wouldn't having a diverse set of job experiences enable me to expand the business further and enhance the benefits for our employees? With that thought, after discussing with my dad, I had chosen to venture out and experience various companies firsthand. It had been a year since I began working at our family-owned factory. While I hadn't yet made significant strides for the company, I believed wholeheartedly in my potential. From my grandfather and father to every employee in the factory, everyone was closely knit. The work environment was positive, and I found great satisfaction in my daily tasks. However, everything took a turn one day. The news was that the parent company had a change in leadership, and the new CEO would be paying our factory a visit. That particular day, I was busy working in the courtyard behind the factory, so I couldn't step inside to greet him. My supervisor later mentioned,
"The new president of the main contracting company seemed like a good person with a gentle demeanor."
I was glad to hear it. Once I wrapped up my work in the courtyard, I decided to greet the new CEO. Just as I was about to step inside, a man who seemed to be the CEO was leaving the building. I was taken aback when I saw his face. He seemed equally stunned, pausing for a moment before saying,
Adam.
I instantly knew who he was. "It's been a while, Marco," I replied, giving a nod of acknowledgement. He had been a senior member of my high school track team. But the memories I shared with Marco weren't pleasant ones. In fact, recalling them brought back a surge of negative emotions. To put it plainly, Marco used to bully me. He'd take my stuff without reason and use training as an excuse to physically abuse me. These tormenting acts were things that I, as an adult, now realize I should have shared with someone. But back then, I lacked the courage. Every day was a test of my patience and resilience. Feeling powerless and losing confidence every day was a routine until Marco graduated. I remember the relief I felt when I was finally free from his clutches. After that experience, I worked hard to regain my confidence. Through my choices in further education and employment, I had many experiences that eventually helped me recognize my self-worth. I was convinced that I wasn't the same person as I was back then. However, despite that conviction, memories of those unpleasant times spontaneously resurfaced, making my legs tremble.
Is this the factory run by Adam's family?
Marco asked with a smile as if trying to make casual conversation. I found that smile unsettling. But if I showed any hint of fear, it would mean that nothing had changed since those high school days. I've built up my own experiences over nearly 20 years. I won't be controlled by Marco anymore, I thought, mustering up the courage to speak. Yes, it is. This factory has been in operation since my grandfather's time. I joined last year. Hearing this, Marco's smile vanished, and he said in a serious tone,
I see. Well, I'm the president of the main contracting company now, so let's get along.
His demeanor seemed contradictory to his words. The relationship dynamics had shifted. Now the senior from high school was the president of the main contracting company, and the junior was an employee at a subcontracting factory. It felt like my position was even worse than before. But I was determined not to be dominated as before. I felt this was not just a battle with Marco, but rather a battle with myself. Ever since that day, Marco frequently visited our factory. His predecessor didn't visit as often, so I couldn't help but feel that Marco was plotting something. While he was all smiles and cheerfulness in front of other employees, he was cold only to me. It started with minor taunts, like comments about how I had hopped between jobs or insinuations that I was a societal misfit. He even went so far as to fabricate stories, suggesting I had been fired from a previous job for stealing company money. Despite all this, I held my ground, which seemed to irk Marco even more. Initially, many saw Marco as a kind and competent new president, but as they became aware of his behind-the-scenes harassment, his reputation in the factory quickly plummeted. It wasn't Marco's declining reputation that buoyed my spirits but rather the unwavering support of my coworkers. Knowing that they believed in me, even when facing Marco's attempts to discredit me, gave me strength. My factory continued to thrive even more than before Marco's takeover. As work and interpersonal relationships flourished, my concerns about Marco began to fade. One day, a machine that I, along with the factory manager and the team, had been developing was successfully completed, creating a jubilant atmosphere within the company. In a meeting that day, one of the employees remarked,
Ever since Adam joined us, things have been going really well for our factory. We're truly grateful.
Although I felt humbled by such praise, it undoubtedly made me happy. I responded, No, the pleasure is mine, thank you. While we were engaged in this conversation, an office clerk entered the workshop and said,
Adam, President Marco is in the reception room waiting for you.
Surprised, I asked, Is he calling for me? I wasn't the factory manager, and there should be no reason for Marco, the president of the main contracting company, to call me out personally. He hadn't ever done so before, which made me suspicious. However, when the clerk confirmed,
Yes, he specifically asked for you.
I couldn't decline. With a sense of foreboding, I made my way to the reception room where Marco awaited. "I apologize for the wait," I said upon entering. Marco, lounging on a sofa, glared at me and sneered.
Making me wait for 10 minutes. Adam, you've become quite arrogant.
I struggled to control my urge to apologize profusely and replied calmly. "I'm sorry. I was in a meeting." Marco retorted.
It's your aloof attitude that irks me. When did you become so self-assured? In front of me, you should be crying and begging. Remember, you're nothing but a slow-witted, worthless pauper.
Though Marco frequently ridiculed and harassed me, it had been since our high school days that he had shouted at me in such a manner. I was taken aback. Still, I responded. That wasn't my intention. I sincerely apologize for any offense caused. I had learned during my time in sales to remain calm and offer sincere apologies in the face of adversity. However, this approach seemed to infuriate Marco even more.
You truly are an idiot.
He spat.
It's this damn sincere attitude of yours that I can't stand. And it seems you don't quite understand the difference in our positions, me, the president of the main contracting company, and you, a mere employee of a minor factory.
Marco sneered.
Fine, let's make this clear. As of today, our company will sever its ties with this factory.
His sudden announcement to end the contract was shocking. Given the long-standing business relationship between our factory and his company, cutting off the contract would significantly hurt our operations. I thought, I must convince Marco to reconsider. Wait, please. I'll do anything to make this right. Please reconsider. I pleaded as Marco started to leave the room. The corners of his mouth turned up in a sly grin, as if he'd been expecting this reaction.
Anything?
He taunted. Yes. I replied, dreading what would come next.
All right then, prostrate yourself right here. Press your forehead to the floor and beg pitifully for my forgiveness.
Marco demanded. I had somewhat expected Marco to ask for this. Although I was reluctant and felt humiliated, I reasoned that if this was what it took to save the factory my grandfather and father had maintained for years, it was a small price to pay. I gathered my resolve and got down on my knees, pressing my forehead to the ground. I deeply apologize for any distress I may have caused. I said earnestly.
Ha! This is exactly how you should always be in front of me.
Marco mocked. He then grabbed a nearby cleaning bucket, checked to confirm it was filled with water, and without warning, emptied its contents over me. I was drenched, water dripping from my forehead, but all I could think about was the future of the factory. Just then,
Oh my! Adam!
The office clerk, who had come to serve tea, had witnessed the scene and cried out in shock. Her loud exclamation attracted other employees, who rushed into the room.
What on earth is going on here?
They all stared in bewilderment at the scene before them. But to Marco, it seemed he didn't care at all about how he was perceived by the employees of our factory. At that moment, I believed I had no choice but to continue bowing deeply to Marco until he was satisfied. Just as I continued to do so,
What are you doing?
the one who entered the reception room with that exclamation was my father, the factory manager. After assessing the situation briefly, he boomed.
You threw water at my son. Did you do this, President Marco?
It was entirely unexpected for my usually mild-mannered father to raise his voice like that against the president of the main contracting company. Without any sign of being flustered, Marco laughingly replied.
Yes, I did. Is there a problem? I merely cooled down your incompetent son.
I thought to myself, Marco doesn't really care if our relationship deteriorates. On the other hand, we, being a small factory, can't afford to have such a fallout. Dad has no choice but to back down. Just him standing up to the president for even a moment on my behalf is more than I could have asked for. As I began to speak, my father unexpectedly interjected.
No matter if you are the president of the main contracting company, I cannot forgive you for treating my son this way. We will terminate our contract with your company effective today.
Both Marco and I were taken aback by this declaration. Dad, what are you saying? If you do that. I tried to interject, but my father sharply cut me off with.
You stay out of this.
Then Marco burst into laughter and said,
I never imagined I'd be told to terminate a contract by a weak, nerdy little company like yours. For such a puny factory, you sure have a lot of pride. I won't care if you go bankrupt.
It seemed that the bankruptcy of our company wouldn't be a big deal for Marco's firm. Then my father began to tell Marco something unexpected.
You really don't know anything, do you? Although we're indeed a small factory, thanks to my son, we've recently developed a device using a unique technology and are in the process of acquiring a patent. The previous president would have been aware of this, but you seem so busy looking down on subsidiary companies that you're utterly uninformed.
Marco, who seemed to be unaware of this, showed a surprised expression but retorted.
What? Even if that's true, it probably won't be a big profit. I don't care about such trivial things.
I didn't understand how much of a loss it would be for Marco's company, but after hearing my father say,
well, roughly a loss of 300 million yen. If you can't believe it, you might want to rush back to your company and ask the previous president. Nonetheless, we have no intention of continuing our contract with your company.
Marco hurriedly left. I later heard that the 300 million yen figure was indeed accurate, and we subsequently received an apology from Marco. However, considering his previous defamatory remarks about me in other factors, we proceeded in the direction of not renewing the contract. I was worried about whether our factory's business would be alright, but the new device successfully obtained its patent, and our business has been steadily growing. Moreover, without the disruptive presence, we regained our previous peace and acquired something we've never had before. I received a lot of help from my father and the employees during this incident. This time, I genuinely want to become someone who can protect our precious factory and its workers. That's what I wholeheartedly believe.